Hey there, everyone. I'm Kacey Kasem, and this is my podcast. Get Real with Kacey Kasem is the podcast that goes behind the scenes of the fantasy football industry through interviews with people in the fantasy football space. In this episode, I got to talk with Bob Harris, senior editor with Fantasy Football Diehards, Sirius XM Fantasy host, FSWA Hall of Fame member, and an all-around cool guy. In this episode, we talk about how he played football while growing up, how he got started in the industry, cats, his weight loss journey, concerts, and a ton more. Make sure you follow Bob on Twitter at Football Diehard. You can find me on Twitter at TheKCKasem. You can follow the pod on Twitter at GetReal_pod. You can also find my writing with the Fantasy Footballers at thefantasyfootballers.com. This podcast is a proud member of the DAP Network. You can also help grow the show. Check out the Patreon at patreon.com/KaceyKasem. You only need to donate a few bucks a month. Come be part of the Stay Rad crew. And thanks to the newest member of the club, Andrew Neal. Your support is greatly appreciated. If you want to help grow the show even more, make sure to rate and review this podcast. Thanks to all of you for being so rad. And P.S., if you make it out to the Fantasy Football Expo on August 15th in Canton, Ohio, make sure you say hey. I'll be out there for this awesome event. You can find more info at thefantasyfootballexpo.com. Thanks, and here's the conversation with Bob Harris. There we go, see? Hey. Yeah. Well, I am so glad that you could be here today, Bob, to talk, to everybody about everything from day one to now. So
all 1,000 years.
Yeah, we've got a lot to cover tonight. So you guys bear with us, but no. Bob, I really want to start off talking to you about just as a kid, were you into sports? Did you watch sports, play sports?
Yeah, watched and played. My dad was a huge football fan. A Dallas Cowboys fan, no less. I didn't really share in that. I mean, you kind of, follow along with your parents. But I loved to play. He loved to play as well. But I started playing youth football, Pop Warner football, when I was 8 years old, and played continuously into college. So it was a big part of my life. Football just in general and everything that goes with it. And then, after that, you're like, wow, I can't really play anymore. So what am I going to do? So became a big fan. Interestingly, grew up in Tucson, Arizona, so I didn't have a team. In Tucson, not many of us are natives or where I grew up. So everyone comes from another place and everyone has a team, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I don't have one of those, So as high school was coming to an end, the Seahawks and Buccaneers, they expanded to Seattle and Tampa Bay. So I flipped a coin, and one of them was going to be my team, and it turned out to be Seattle. Fortuitous for me, that coin toss. The Buccaneers struggled mightily for a while. Seahawks were at least enjoyable and competitive, but my heart was never really in it. It was just like my team in name, so I could say I had a team. Since then, I've kind of become more of a, someone says, "What's your favorite team?" and I say the least complicated. I hate them all equally, and that's kind of for work purposes, it comes in handy.
Yeah, I mean, most people that come on here, it's like, oh yeah, I started off this fan, and now I'm just kind of like, yeah. So that's cool. I don't think I could get rid of my Cowboys allegiance like that, but they do test me a lot. So
yes.
So you played football. Was there anything that you learned from playing sports growing up that you've taken with you into adulthood? Something, a lesson learned along the way?
I think, the usual lessons. I think what sports are good for and always will be good for is, that kind of team building, the ability to work with others, the ability to understand your role on a team. And, I had a great coach in high school, Ollie Mayfield, a legend in Tucson and Arizona sports. And, we were all spokes on the wheel, right? We were not the wheel. There were no wheels on the team, right? And these things all sound corny and, but they're instilled in you. And I think sports does that. You kind of learn to work with other people and look, there's stars on every team, right? We all know that, but unless anyone's doing our job, nobody gets to shine. And so I just feel like that's what sports gives you and kind of a work ethic. That was kind of instilled in me also, in playing sports. I mean, if you don't work hard, you're not going to get to play. And I love to play.
And when did you find out about fantasy football and why did you get started with that?
So it was sometime after that. High school was a long time ago. Fantasy sports also a long time ago. So a friend of mine from our younger days. So it was in the mid '80s. A friend of mine named Ron went away to San Diego to do some work. Came back a couple of years later, 1986, and we had everyone. You have your little group of friends, and we were all sitting around. And Ron comes back, says, "You guys, I found this thing. You're going to love it." What is it? It's fantasy football. And we all kind of, okay, tell us more. And he told us more, and he did not need to tell us for long. We were all immediately sold. We had a group of, I think there was 10 of us at the time, so 10-team league we started out with. And man, it just, the thing about fantasy sports is just that connection to a game you love, right? That you can't have anymore, if you played or, if you're on the peripheral or just a fan. You get that level of competition, and we all sit around and, shake our fist at GMs and coaching decisions and all these things. And it just takes that connection with the sport you love to another level and gives it a personal connection. So it was an immediate addiction. And also immediately, like within a week of starting to play in the first regular season, realized that we didn't have enough information to do this right. We just didn't, right? I mean, we went by the USA Today would come out, the injury report would come out on Wednesday, and you would line somebody up based on that. And, all of a sudden, why is Bill Belichick holding Michael Jackson out of this game on Sunday? He was probable, so, I mean, there was a lot of that went on and just, that gap of knowledge that you really needed to excel, right? I mean, like, if you're super competitive, and everyone who plays fantasy sports is, right, by nature, super competitive. It seemed like there was a hole there. And so that was kind of where the whole notion of this started. Like, man, we got to do something about this.
So how did you do research for the players that you were even going to select to be a part of your team? And, you didn't have, everything at your fingertips like we do now. So what was the process there?
You had pencils and papers and magazines, which shockingly are still part of my life, big part of my life. But that was the thing. We get like the Athlon or whatever, just, a collection of stats. And we would start looking and trying to understand what the changes were. And obviously it wasn't to the level we understand now, but that didn't keep us from trying, right? I mean, we sat there. And the funny thing was, I always talk about it now. The NFL has become a 365-day reality show. Right? They're never out of it. I mean, we saw Peyton Manning at the baseball's big seminal event of their All-Star thing, the home run derby, talking about football, right? Talking about Aaron Rodgers. So, I mean, that's where the NFL's out. But back then it wasn't there. There was an off season. And like early in this whole notion of this fantasy sports industry, when we started going in the early 90s, there was an off season. That's when I became the expert, right? Because I was looking for information and able to get information that not everyone was doing, and everyone wasn't grinding on this year round and that level of interest. It was there in the season, just wasn't there. There was an actual off season. There is not that anymore. So, but we would sit around and, groups of us as friends and groups of us in the league, and we would sit around and we would just discuss players and directions teams were going. And the draft was always a big deal. You'd watch that and kind of start extrapolating things and changes that the team might make. And again, it was not at the level we're at now, but we were grinding in our own way the best we could. And we were truly interested and invested fans, in the NFL and in our teams.
So how did the league progress as you guys, how did you guys tweak things and learn things and get that information maybe even a little bit quicker than you were doing?
Well, so I was a graphic designer at the time. And so I started making a little newsletter, and our league was called the Tucson Football League, just had a name. So I called the little newsletter the TFL Report, which eventually became the name of my business when I first started. But it started getting fancy because, of course, I don't know how to do anything halfway, right? So before long, we have this 12-page graphically enhanced newsletter with blurbs and stats and smack talk. And, I'm doing like entertaining little diatribes about everyone's team, recapping games, and also out looking for information. And at that time started, the computer era was just cranking up, right? I was like a rarity back then. I was a graphic designer who worked on a PC because I came kind of from an engineering world. So I was ostracized in my own field to a degree. Everyone worked with me. Everyone's pretty cool. But, you go to an image setter or whatever, and they're going, oh, what kind of Mac file is this? Oh, it's not. But I would print these things out, and everyone had a really good time with it. And everyone really seemed to enjoy any bit of information, right? And I always, don't want to make a crude joke of it, but I mean, a fantasy manager, those of us who play the game, we're the kind of person who sits on the toilet reading the back of the shampoo bottle, right? Because we have to be consuming information. And I think that's kind of a shared trait of everyone who plays the game still, is that quest for, constant feed of information. And so we started to be able to get that. I think CompuServe was the first online service I used, and had access to the AP Sports Wire, which was like a godsend. Oh, look, all this information, articles on the teams by a writer from that area. And that's kind of how I started getting the beginning of the idea of like, wow, I can maybe gather up enough information to do something worthwhile. And honestly, knowing, having played fantasy football for a day, I was convinced it was going to be the biggest thing ever on the face of God's green earth. There was no way this wasn't going to be the thing that changed the entire way the planet rotated. So I started investing that level of time in it and that level of energy, and was treated accordingly by everyone around me. But that was kind of the genesis of it, was just basically wanting to entertain and inform my own league. But realizing, man, that, everyone who plays this game feels the same way I do, in the same way all my league mates did then. And people still do now. I mean, look, you get your sleeper app. When you hear that sleeper app sound, what are you doing? You're grabbing the damn phone, right?
My wife's throwing it across the room when she did it.
Exactly. So that's kind of, the unifying factor of all this is understanding what the audience was. And I talk about this all the time, is like people say, oh, you're a fantasy expert. No, I'm a fantasy professional. My job is making other people the experts. But the truth is, everyone who plays this game is an expert, right? They make themselves to a degree an expert. And if it were not for a quirk of fate, they would probably be doing my job better than me. And if they couldn't be, they certainly think they could be. I don't think they're wrong, right? I think it's just, if you play this game, you're invested in it, right? And you're trying to become more knowledgeable, and you're open to the ideas and information that's coming to you, especially now. Like, you look out there at the number of super smart people who are just, climbing the walls trying to get into this, and they all have great content and great ideas. Yeah. And I think that's been the case all along, is there's always been people, and most of them come from where? Just people who play the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, as we play the game, more and more people are getting involved, because it not only is it fun, but like now we found a community of people who are like-minded, and that's awesome to have that community. So what is something from when you first started playing fantasy football that is like something that you kind of miss, something that was maybe even nostalgic, like what's something that
I don't know that I necessarily miss them, but some of those early things that we had to do, like, the running out to the store to grab the USA Today on Monday morning, which is basically how we all scored our leagues, right? You ran out, you got those box scores and got caught up. And that's something that, eventually I used to my advantage. When I first started my business, I advertised in USA Today, and suddenly that phone line I had needed to be 10 phone lines, right? But also knowing how everyone did their scoring, I mentioned the CompuServe. I would get I would go into my office on Sunday nights, and I would get on CompuServe, and I'd pull down the box scores for all the games, which nobody else had. And I went out and got a 900 number, and I would record every box score, and people would listen to that and pay premium dollars, and they would sit through the whole damn thing, right? I mean, they just wanted to hear it all, because not only did they want to know their score, but they wanted to be able to call their buddies and say, oh, I guess you didn't know this, but hey, right? I mean, there's a whole industry based on, hey, I bet you didn't hear, right? I mean, so I've been kicked out of more leagues for saying, oh, gee, I guess you didn't know that. But that was kind of, that early quest for knowledge, information, just data. And we were all out there racing to get it. And it started becoming more readily available. Then it was a matter of how you delivered it. And I think, but that's the thing I missed early on, that, spending Monday morning sitting in either a McDonald's or somewhere, your work with that USA Today and a big bunch of notebook papers, doing everyone's game, seeing where everyone stood. It was always a great time.
That's awesome. And I've had a lot of people come on the show and talk about like having to, rush out and get, whatever publication. How did you get yourself to be on a schedule where you were able to do that? Like, because I feel like it would be a lot of like trial and error to get it like fine tuned.
So I was too stupid not to do it. So I often say, I am too stupid to quit. And that is pretty much the case of how this all came to be. It was I did a lot of stupid stuff early on and was fortunately too stupid to quit. When I started the first year of doing what we call the TFL report, I just kind of went generic, the Fantasy League report, but it came from the Tucson Football League. But it was basically the same thing. It was a newsletter. I just made it more broad-based and generic. And I was pretty good at graphic design, so I could give it a pretty appealing look for back in the, early 90s, right? 93, 94. And, but I said, I'm going to do this like I do all my work. So I would literally write this thing up, finish it up Monday night, run it down to my service bureau, have negatives made that night. They would work overnight on that for me. Take it to a printer who would do traditional offset printing of all the copies of this. And I would put them all together, fold them up. And we had subscribers. I think the first year we had about 100. I would put those things in the mail, charge people about $70 a pop, put those in the mail and send them out. And the goal was to get them out on Tuesday at some point, or at least to the post office on Tuesday, so they had a chance of getting to people before the weekend. And then I had the genius idea of realizing, look, man, there needs to be a little bit more. So I added a fax and I said, everybody, you get your choice of Friday or Saturday, Thursday, Friday or Saturday, a fax. I did one a day and then quickly bumped it up to a couple a day. But that was a learning experience in its own right. And all these, all the notion of printing things and the money you spend on the printing, the money I spent on producing and mailing and stuffing envelopes, and then the fax. So the fax, I had a phone line. I had a computer. Yeah, fax software. It's worked pretty well until that first guy called saying, hey, where's my fax? And then the entire system crashed because I had that one phone line. And so I would end up in tears pretty much every day, about an hour into trying to fax. And so the second season, somebody called me. Hey, have you heard of fax broadcasting? No, tell me more. And all of a sudden I had this thing where I could literally write one fax, hit a button, they all go out at once. This was a huge revelation. And so how we did it, I had a guy at WFAN radio in New York. His name was Steve Cohen. He's now the boss at Sirius of NFL. But he was working as a producer for Mike Francesa. And he would call me and, Harris, I got it here. And he would say, oh, this guy was able to practice but could only run in a straight line. So he had the connections to all the teams. And so he would give me that information. I would write it up into the one-page fax, just the essential information. And that went out. And that was kind of like a pretty revolutionary thing. I don't think anyone was doing anything quite like it at the time. And that was fantastic. I thought, man, I've really got the edge. And then at the end of that first 94 season, one of my subscribers called me and says, hey, Bob, you ever hear of the World Wide Web? No, tell me more. I did a lot of no tell me mores back in that day. And so he explained this thing to me. And after a couple minutes, I'm saying, so wait, you're saying I can make one of something or a million of something and send them all out and deliver them all for the same price as the one? And that was essentially it. So next thing you know, I was becoming an expert in the making of websites, which I became pretty good at that as well. Won a number of awards doing that, started a company, a web design company after I kind of got into the football thing, did a lot of work for the other sites at the time because I just felt like, wow, we have a chance to be a thing. And the better we all look, the better we all look. I mean, it was a pretty simple thing. I want to fill that pool higher. So I did websites for a number of the sites early did a lot of logo designs and things like that. And I think, the idea was, man, let's get eyes on us. And I think I was one of the first people that did like a really comprehensive links page to everyone else because I was an arrogant guy too. And I said, look, they look at the other guys, they're going to come back to me, of course. And so kind of, that was the early genesis of all that. And then the information got easier to get, of course. And it kind of, grew from there. At the time, I had a number of 800 lines. The 900 line was kind of going up. But for the first few years, that carried me financially. I made enough money to live year round on that. So I didn't have to quit. In addition to being too stupid to quit, I didn't have to. So it kind of, grew from there. And then I was kind of clever about a number of things. Like I would call teams and they'd say, God, not another fantasy person. I say, no, I'm the fantasy person you need to tell. So what they were getting was the same thing I was seeing. They were getting thousands of calls, the team's media relations departments about guys that were injured. And in the mid 90s, I kind of went and I got to all the teams. I think there was a point where like 25, 26 teams would do nothing but give you my 800 number if you called in for fantasy and asked them a question. And I mean, there were people in the Kansas City media relations department when Joe Montana was there, had elbow issues. I mean, it was like literally a frenzy. Then they started telling some of the local newspapers who were getting the same calls, they would start giving out my number. So it just kind of snowballed from there. And then you came to a point, a little later in the 90s, 96, 97, where the NFL finally decided, wow, this isn't like gambling, or maybe it is, but we don't care because the people who play this game love football and they spend money on it. And that's kind of when things really started taking off. That and the advent of commissioner softwares, the CBS commissioner software, 96, 97. I mean, once we kind of rounded that corner, the internet, obviously a huge piece of this puzzle, but once we rounded that corner, the momentum really started building.
So how did you jump from what you were doing, and then how did it get to a point where you were like, I can make a career out of this, I can do, like, what was the process from, it's starting off small to getting, to where you felt comfortable doing it?
So in 1993, when I first started this, I had the ads at USA Today, and a fellow started calling me, asking me if I wanted to advertise in his publication, which was a magazine just about fantasy football. His name was Emil Kadlik. I still work for him now. And so it kind of, it became a growing thing, and he did just the magazines, not really into the web aspect of it. I was pushing in that direction. He was continuing. The magazines were growing. And over time, I just started doing more and more work for him. And then pretty soon I was working exclusively for him. I think by 97, that was pretty much, became and then in 98, I actually moved here to Albuquerque where he was located. At the time, it was beneficial to be able to put your foot on somebody's throat when they were late with something or whatever, Obviously, since then, the communications and the ability to, view whatever everybody's work got a lot easier. But, so I moved here in 98 and we've continued to grow. So the magazines went from the Pro Forecast, which was his first publication. This is our 32nd year of the Pro Forecast. Added the Football Diehards magazine, not in this order. The order was, I think, the one called the Draft Book, Cheat Sheets magazine, and then Football Diehards. They're all over 20 years old now. There's over, I think the distribution has been as high as 1 million magazines. We're the biggest publisher of print publications and newsstand sales in the country. And there came a point where I just, look, everyone knows what's up with magazines, right? They're a snapshot. They're a moment caught in time.
Right.
Well, there comes a point where that doesn't cut it. And so that's where we kind of put together the web aspect and the print aspect. And basically just said, look, the website is a free portion. It's part of the magazine. It's a continuation of the magazine. And we've continued that kind of process over the course of time and kind of refined it to now, trying to be more evergreen in the content of the magazines with more in-depth strategy. Look, you've got to cover players and situations and issues and things like that. But it's like anything else. The more reps you get, the better you get. The thing about magazines, you get 1 rep a year, right? Or in our case, 4 reps a year. So it takes time, but I think we've got it dialed in pretty well now. And I feel pretty comfortable with the mix of content between what we have in the magazines and what we have on the web. And of course, the web content's kind of been a continuation of what I've done since the day I started, which is just as much information as I can crank out and just try to, the idea has always been, give the reader, give our customers enough information to get an edge on their competition. And I think everyone in the space is doing that, right? And it makes for a very competitive world. And it was super competitive back then in the 90s. It's no less competitive now. I think we all realize we're chasing the same nuggets, and that part of the race is less racy, I would guess, because we're all getting things at the same time. But it's how you leverage that information and how you get it and how you deliver it to your customers. That's the race now.
Yeah, I was going to ask you more about the evergreen portion of that, because it has changed. I do know that when I go on like vacation, I love to have a fantasy football magazine with me when I'm on the beach or whatever, like, because that's around the same time, not like a humble brag that I go to the beach, but like it's nice to have something like that hard copy, plus the nostalgia factor of it all too.
Right.
Do you feel that people buy magazines because also it kind of reminds them of a different time?
To a degree, yeah. Or it's just a habit, right? It's something they've always done.
Right.
And I mean, there's something to all of that. And I do think that there's a place for that thing you hold in your hand. Like, sometimes you're on the beach, I'm an electronics guy, right? I want to see, I want to have all my screens, my phones, my tablets. Can't always see them good, right? I mean, there's times where they have limitations. And I also think a magazine is kind of nice. I mean, look, we put rankings in our magazines. We do all those things. Also, the rankings are updated on the website. You can print them out and extend them. But people like that whole thing of having that whole package in their hands. I would encourage everyone who does that to print out an update. It's not hard. It doesn't take you a lot of time. It's customizable, configurable. Do it. But in the meantime, it does kind of help them. So the way we look at it is pretty simple. We're setting the baseline with that, right? You're getting people the information they need to know to get started. And then it's up to them and using our website or whatever other sources of information they use to continue plugging in bits of data until their draft, when they have that more complete timeline. That's what we're all doing in this space, right? And as both a player and an information provider, you're just trying to give those bits of data, and part of the job from both ends of that is managing what's important information, what's information that I need to maybe dial back on, and that's where we're at now. In the world of Twitter, where it's basically you stick a fire hose in your mouth and turn it on high. I mean, you can literally get overrun by information and get caught up in the minute by minute. And I think part of our job also in this industry is to help people give people perspective on what the important aspects of that are and what the less important aspects are.
So you were talking about adding more strategy to the magazines. With fantasy football growing and there being more kinds of leagues and different kinds of settings and things of that nature, does that add like way too much content for you guys that you have to kind of figure out how to whittle it down? Or do you think there's a good amount that you guys can get it in there and make it?
I think we're able to cover a good amount. And what obviously, magazine is a real estate based thing, right? You have a number of pages and you have to prioritize and get into things that are most important to the most readers. And just like it, I mean, you look at ESPN, I mean, there's still 10-team leagues. They only recently switched to PPR, so I mean, you have to kind of move along with the audience, but by the same token, you have to realize that, like I love playing Superflex. I want to play Superflex tight end premium. I want to do all the, not everyone is doing that, right? I want to play full IDP dynasty with 50-man rosters and 2 copies of each player in a 32-team league, right? So these are things that, you've got to kind of moderate and temper, my personal enthusiasm for those things to what's best for the audience. That said, having the online component, you can dig as deep into those things as you want. And you try to make the point that, hey, these things exist, learn more here. Because I do think that's, the evolution of this game has been part of the amazing part of it, right? How we sit there. And I mean, we're all in the Scott Fishbowl right now, right? And Scott is annually, pushing the envelope, creating new boundaries and things like that. And I think that's the great thing. I love that part of this, right? Where, like it took me a number of years to get into IDP. Now that I'm in it, I can't get out. Right. Yeah. I mean, I just thought, wow, that's just a lot of work. Right. And then next thing you know, you're hooked and you're into it. And so I think all these, I love all these innovations, but in the magazine world, you have to understand who the audience is and maybe inform them that things exist and they need to look into more deeply, but you've got to focus on the aspects that they're playing. Part of that was like the rise of DFS, that demanded a fair amount of real estate. There's a lot of interesting strategic approaches to the various games and contests. And also people are making money at it. So they're going to have that interest. And I also think, at the time that DFS came out, it basically fixed everything that was wrong with season long. right? Whether it was injuries, a bad draft, it was circumstances. I mean, every week being able to field a new team, really, the combination of a lot of season long and a lot of DFS, I felt like was the perfect thing.
When you started putting out magazines, because the magazine portion of this whole story is really interesting to me, because that's one of my first memories of fantasy football was buying the magazines and putting it out. When you were putting it out, did you ever have a feeling that maybe you were doing all this work and there was no happy ending to it, or did you know that it was going to be something that was going to take off?
Well, so I always knew it was going to take off. I mean, I never had a doubt, and there was no doubt in my mind. People thought I was insane. People didn't even understand what I was doing. The vast majority of people early on, I always tell a story about my mom. I'm sitting here and she's going, "What is it you're doing?" I show her my computer screen. I show her my website. I say, "Look this is what I do." You make computer monitors? What? I mean, it was literally, and that was not unusual, an unusual response, right? So
yeah, there you go.
People just didn't really understand, a make-believe game about a real game, and you could try to explain it to them, and they just weren't really interested in hearing it. To people who played it, they were interested in hearing it. So for me, right from the get-go, I was convinced, probably to my detriment. In fact, I mean, I could remember, so there was just a few of us out there doing this early on. And I know ESPN contacted me and, thought, maybe you'd like to come work for us. I said, "Are you kidding me? I'm going to be the biggest thing, you guys." And, and I kind of recommended somebody else who went on to have great success there. And some years later, you kind of look back and say, man, didn't necessarily need to be that arrogant. But that was I was that convinced this was going to be, if not as big as it is, slightly bigger. And look, it's probably exceeded even my expectations, right? I mean, but I really did think it was going to be big because, just like everyone who plays, once you play, you feel a connection to it. And I think the online world, and this started with the news groups back in the day, right? That's where I met a lot of the people that are still in the business to this day, the Joe Bryants, David Dodds, just a large John Hansen, a large group of us out in the news groups, having a good time, talking smack to each other, arguing, trying to extol our own virtues, etc. And it's that community aspect of it that also started to catch my attention. Not just the fact that people love to play, but the people who love to play love to get together and discuss and debate and argue and have a good time with it.
And I definitely am going to touch on the community aspect of fantasy football in a little bit, because it's such an awesome part of fantasy football. But I want to know, because growing up being a fantasy football anything wasn't a thing, fantasy football wasn't a thing, right? So how did you I guess when you were growing up, what did you want to be for starters? What were you like, when I grew up, I'm going to be this?
I don't think there was ever that. I don't think I
didn't have that either. So I don't.
Yeah, I didn't have that gear. I didn't have a moderation gear. I got in a lot of trouble. I could not see beyond this, the end of my nose. Basically, I was just a rudderless ship. And so, I didn't get into the fantasy sports until a little later. Not, I don't want to say my teen. It was in my mid 20s. I didn't turn it into a business until I was going on 30. And so you're a little older than 30, 32, 33 years old. But I kind of started heading that direction when I hit about 30. So, and I also like to joke, if I'm in this another 20 years, I might break even. So it's kind of been more, as much a passion and an avocation, but it was all of a sudden I was just drifting aimlessly. I was doing stupid stuff. I was probably going to be dead. And then all of a sudden, here's this thing that said, "Oh, look, you can do me." And not only could I do it, I could do it pretty much around the clock as much as I wanted and put as much effort into it. And I drew that satisfaction back from it. And it's this stupid old saying, find something you love and you'll never work another day. Well, work is play, right? And I just found this, and I just said, look, I'm really good at a lot of things that will help me do this. So, not just the football part, but the technical parts and things like that I felt like, I could give something to this that would, number one, keep me out of trouble. And number two, I enjoyed it. Right. And so that was a big part of it for me. It's just I found something, look, and so I never wanted to be anything but this, but it took me a while to get to that. Right. I just kind of, it took me a while.
And we briefly touched on this earlier about this part of your life, but with football diehards, well, explain to everybody out there that's listening, maybe somebody that doesn't know what football diehards is because they're living under a rock or something. What exactly is the whole concept of that, and how did you get involved with football diehards?
So as Emil and I started working together in the mid 90s, I really started pushing for an online component. I was convinced the magazines would be dead, right? He was convinced they would not. And he was right. But I just, I kept thinking, man, we need to push this envelope of having current, up-to-date information. And so we did start adding on the website portion of that. And after a few years of doing that, he came up with the Football Diehards, kind of brand for that portion of it. And we wanted a brand that we could associate with all of the different magazines. And eventually we made a magazine that was just Football Diehards. But that was kind of the genesis of that was the push by me to keep more current and have the online version, and Emil's wanting to stick with his business sense. And look, I am not a great businessman, it turns out, right? I mean, I'm good at a lot of things. Business is not one of them. Okay. To have been gainfully employed in the same job for 30 some years, I feel very fortunate. And much of that credit goes to him, his foresight, and his ability to turn nothing into something over the course of time, and keep me working, be able to use my skills and be willing to listen to some of my ideas. And for me, it was kind of liberating to not be the one who had to make all the decisions. Like, one of the great things about Emil is he doesn't always do what I tell him, but he always listens to what I tell him. And when the ideas are actually good, he'll do them. When they're not really that great, he has a very polite way of putting me off.
Writing articles over there and just writing articles in general, like, had you ever done any writing besides the newsletter prior to? Were you well versed in writing?
So I mentioned, coming out of a little bit of an engineering background, I wrote like manuals, instruction manuals, quality manuals, things like that. So but I think the start of that was running out to the mailbox every Friday to grab the Sports Illustrated, right? Or when I was a kid, reading Xander Hollander's Strange But True Football Stories. I tore that book up. I mean, wore the pages out, right? Reading them over and over. And, I kind of, when I started doing this, I had kind of a goal in mind. Don't look like I'm just a guy who started doing this, because that's what I was, right? But I wanted to not look like that. And so a lot of how I do that, like everything we do in life, Kacey, I mean, there's some degree of mimicry, right? You're looking at someone who does something, and you're saying, wow, I like the way they do that. I want to be like that. And so for me, it was reading Sports Illustrated my entire life as a youth, and the local sports pages and things like that, and understanding, and a little bit of journalism in school, but just enough to be dangerous, right? Not enough to really be a journalist. So, but I wanted to have that level of integrity in my work, right? I wanted to make sure, I want to be first, but I don't need to be wrong, and over time you learn things like, wow, it's a lot harder to unring the bell than it is to ring it. So, there's all these lessons you learn over time about how to do this. But I think the writing aspect of it just came from, number one, I love telling stories. I love telling stories about sports. I loved reading stories about sports, and just putting all those things together. That was part of this magical, like, wow, look at this thing I found, man. I just, and, I think we all have our writing styles, et cetera. And, for a lot of us that come into this business, it's almost conversational, right?
Yes.
And you're literally telling a story. And I love that part of it, man. I could do that. If that's all I did, I would be a very happy person, right? There's a lot more to it now, but that was really, and there was a lot more to it then, keeping up with that part of it, and keeping up with the design work and the web work and things like that. But that's always the part that really brings the joy to me.
So when you're writing for your audience and you're writing for a mass group of people, how do you make sure that the content you're putting out kind of is able to be digested by anyone?
Right. So I think that's part of that, is being, conversational. And so, like, I think a lot of the things that I read out there, I mean, again, really smart people coming in. Sometimes, you really have to understand what they're saying, and it takes a little bit of effort. There's nothing wrong with that. But for me, I want to make it so that I can sit there and, look, the number one idea, being able to communicate your ideas, whether it's in the written or, spoken word, whatever, however you like to communicate your ideas, music, however you do that, you have to be entertaining in the way you do it, and you have to be accessible. And I think that's the most important thing for me. And it's also kind of natural for me, or it has been kind of natural for me to write stories that people seem to find entertaining and enjoyable. And especially when they're about something that they're also interested in and they're getting information from. And that's always been how I've approached it. I don't think there's any single right approach, but I'll tell you this, if you don't have somebody hooked at the first paragraph, you're going to lose them. Right. So that's the thing I tell people who want to write or try to get into business. I'm saying, make it interesting, catch my attention, make me keep reading. And and I think a lot of times that's easier said than done.
And I want to talk to you about being in radio as well, because that's something that you do. For people who haven't been in radio, what is that kind of progression from writing to jumping into something like that? Like, how does that happen? And what were you feeling like the first time you were actually doing radio gigs?
I felt really comfortable at first because I was doing a lot of, just hits on local stations. And that started pretty early on. And again, communicating your ideas, whether you're speaking or writing, is important in this. And I was able to, funny thing is, the more you do it on radio, the more concise, and especially over time, you really have to be concise in spitting your ideas out, which hasn't necessarily been my thing. I want to sit down and write a piece that explains. Like I said, you're reading the back of the shampoo bottle. You want all the information. You want every single bit. And I think that's the biggest adjustment for me in getting into radio, is being more concise and on point. It's helpful also in your writing as you go on. You realize, wow, I don't have to say every single word in the dictionary to make my point. I can use just a few. And so there is a relationship between the two, and it's been helpful. The radio for me was pretty easy at first. Just doing the hits. I felt really comfortable. I've made it really conversational. It's easy to do things like, you're in a local market and you're talking about a team, and like there's always a piece of information you can throw out there that kind of signals to that audience, wow, he knows as much about our team as we do, right? And that kind of buys you a little credibility to build on with that audience as you expand about what you're talking about. But if you can throw them that little tidbit, give them that little bite that says, oh yeah, he knows about that guy. Well, hell, he knows it all then, right? And those are the kind of things that I kind of learned early on. And when I started doing it more regularly, I mean, who I'm working with has been a big factor. And Mike Dempsey is someone I've worked with since his days. I used to do a show go on his show in Jacksonville on 1010 XL and would chop that up with him. And we really hit it off. And then eventually we worked together on Sirius, pretty much every single day. And I work with other people there now as well. But having somebody who was a true radio professional who taught me a lot of the ways that, how radio should be done, I think has been very helpful.
And bouncing over to being with Sirius XM Radio, is a big brand, a big, company. And, you get a new car, Sirius, there you go. You get your free trial, right? So people are hearing you. What was that kind of like, bouncing into this bigger realm?
So it was a little horrifying at first. I did find it was like a kind of intimidating. And even, so when we started, it was like we were late night Thursday. I mentioned, Steve Cohen, who had done work for me early on in the fantasy when I was getting started in this. And so he's the person who has brought us on to do this at Sirius. And it's a weird feeling. You're, just like anything we do here. I mean, it's like I'm sitting here talking to you. When I'm on the radio, I'm sitting here talking to an empty room, right? And so you kind of keep that in mind. But when I first started on Sirius, I felt like it was a big leap, and I was pretty intimidated, pretty nervous at first, right? Dry mouth, all those things. But that goes away pretty quick. But I'll say this: it happened again when we made the jump to NFL radio, which kind of seemed like a whole different audience who maybe wasn't as bought in on the fantasy aspect, which was still what they wanted us to do, and they want us to do. I'm still we still do a show every week on Sirius NFL during the season, Sirius XM NFL radio during the season. So, but it's become a lot more comfortable for me. I feel it feels really natural now. And, whether I'm working with Dempsey, whether I'm working with Michael Fabiano, Jeff Mans, anyone, there's so many good people that work at that station that pretty much anyone you get on with. I mean, there's been times I've had the good fortune to work with Mike Clay, Matt Camp, Joe Dolan, just that whole group of everybody there. It has been a pleasure to work with, and I couldn't be happier. And everyone kind of brings their own little thing to the table. It's been great.
So what is your day like on a normal basis? Because it sounds like you have a lot going on. So, like, when do you wake up? When do you go to bed? How do you fit it all in there?
I don't do either of those things. No. There was a time where it seemed like so. I think, right? I'm trying to do news updates so in season, I'm doing news updates. So I'm trying to write 40 to 50 updates a day. And then at night, I'm trying to do a little more. I revisit those and try to do a little more in depth, go back and get a little more information, add quotes, things like that, and kind of maybe give it a little more of an assessment. And so I'll write those up at night and put those in for overnight. So people wake up and they have like a fresh batch of content to look at. So basically I try to get up about 6 a.m. I try to do my exercises. That's been a big part of my life is, taking care of myself. I want to live forever now. I've decided. So, and also I have a deficit to make up because there was a long period where I did not take care of myself. So, so I get up and I exercise and I get to work probably by 7 to 8. And then it ends when it ends. And that's often 1 or 2 in the morning. So in the season, there's not a lot of sleep. I think last year I checked my Fitbit average over the last 2 months of the season was like 3.5 hours of sleep a night. So, so it's like, we all know how this works though. I mean, you're not doing this because you like to take time off. You're doing this because you love what you're doing and you're into it. And you realize the obligation you make to your audience when you tell them, hey, I'm going to make you the best informed owner in your fantasy league. Well, there's, you have that obligation to keep. And so between the radio and the writing and the podcasts and the videos, everyone now, we've all added our YouTube channels, try to interact more with the audience and with our subscribers and customers. I think that's a big deal. That's what the internet's about, right? It's that interaction, one-on-one, being able to talk to people directly. And I think the YouTube channel has been a great boon in that regard. I've really enjoyed doing that. And so yeah, it's pretty much nonstop. And I don't know how else. I don't think anyone in this business would have it any other way. Right
on. And speaking of your being healthy and getting up and working out and doing things that a lot of people are like, ugh. Your weight loss journey is a very big part of who you are. And I've had Matt Harmon on here. I've had, Troy King on here who have also gone through weight loss journeys. And yours, you see it pinned to the top of your Twitter, and it's just really cool to read all of that. But tell people that may not be familiar with that story exactly how that is all about.
So I've made no secret of my past as a wild youth. I've been addicted to any number of things. And one way that you get unaddicted to something is you get addicted to something else. And over the course of time, whether it went from a drug to alcohol to whatever, at some point I settled on food. And wow, this doesn't seem so bad in comparison to the other things I was doing, right? Until I was like 400 pounds. And I thought, this is probably not great. This is probably going to kill me every bit as much as those other things were going to kill me. And so I just decided I needed a plan. And one of the excuses I used was, well, I'm really busy. I don't have time to take care of myself, right? I'm working all the time.
Right. Okay.
Well, this just in, taking care of yourself, the effort you put into that is the best thing. You get back 10 times what you put into it. So when I'm putting in that hour a day of exercise, when I'm taking the time to meal prep 1 day a week, so I have all the healthy choices in front of me and I'm not making bad choices, I'm not forced into making bad choices, all of that pays itself back. I can't tell you tenfold, right? The levels of energy, the ability to focus, all those things that I thought, I was gaining all this ground, I was losing ground. And so it's been, and again, I have no moderation gear. So whatever I do, I'm going to do probably way more intensely than I have any business doing. And this was no different. This still is no different. Like I put a lot of effort and energy into it because I think it's worth it. And I think there's, it's easy to slack off. And also part of the other addictions I've, beat, I think back on them and I think, I have this so I've been able to quit things without getting help that a lot of people can't quit.
Right.
And I've done this because I just take a zero tolerance approach. Like it's just boom. Once I decide I'm going to change, and I do. And so I take that same approach with eating and exercise, which is maybe a little bit over the top. I don't necessarily like I'm not actually going to die if I do that one more time. Right. So, or if I miss a workout, but that's the way my mind works is I feel like I want to keep that obligation to myself. And part of this is if you can't keep obligations to yourself, what obligations can you keep? And so it really is an important part of my life and an important part of who I am and how I like to do things. And it's another demonstration to myself that whatever I want to do, I can do. Right. I mean, we've all got that in us, right? We can all, you just have to unlock that door for yourself to realize that I'm the only limitation I have. I am the only thing holding me back. And so that's kind of, and I mean, like, I love like the Beachbody programs, the routines. You see the ads all night long. I love Shaun T. I love Tony Horta. I mean, I've done all of them multiple times. I still do them every day. I've kind of, evolved over time. I started doing yoga every day, which I think has been really helpful. And, as I turn into a super old man, the ability to still move helps me do some of those other routines and kind of do less of the really high intensity interval stuff, which is kind of hard on me now. So I've kind of focused on some different things. And now I'm being talked into the whole Peloton world. So we'll see how that goes once I give it a try.
You'll have to come back and tell us about the whole Peloton thing if that happens. So did at the height of the pandemic and everything, did that have any sort of effect on your workout or anything? Or were you worried that maybe like some people like this girl right here decided that 20 pounds would be awesome to gain during the pandemic? So did you ever think that maybe, it was going to be a little harder than you'd like?
I felt like being healthy was a really good idea.
Yeah.
And so the pandemic is an interesting time because I almost feel a little bit guilty in that it changed my life about 0.1%. I mean, I already had groceries delivered. I already didn't leave the house. Yeah. I already didn't see people. A lot of these things that all of a sudden everyone's going, how do I do this? Were things that were a normal part of my everyday life. I didn't lose a day of work. I mean, there were some adjustments, obviously, for all of us, but it almost made me feel guilty when I talked to people who were so, severely affected and their livelihoods were gone, or the mental health issues that some people had that were associated with this, feelings of loneliness and isolation that they hadn't experienced before, that opened the door to abusing substances or things that, that wouldn't have otherwise happened. I just kind of just felt, man, how fortunate am I that that I'm in this position to keep doing the thing I love. And so, one of the things was I was the person last year saying NFL's playing a whole season. There's no way they're not playing every game. Yeah. And I felt like kind of like, number one, when there's money to be made, don't get in the NFL's way. They will crush you. But also I felt like watching how they were operating over the course of the early parts of it, heading into the season, it seemed like they were taking this very seriously. Right. And they were putting plans in place and protocols in place that I thought, wow, this is going to, not just like figure out for them how to navigate, and like nothing was certain. Right. And we saw that in various weeks where it was pretty much touch and go, but their determination and the fact that they set out some guidelines, like we're going to play games. We're not going to worry about the competitive aspect. We're going to worry about the health aspects. So they did a lot of things right. And I think, when we look back on this, we'll have learned a lot from the data they collected, the approaches they made. They had so much tracking information, and they started doing the genomic sequencing so they could tell where, if an outbreak happened, was it from inside the building? Was it from outside the building? Things like that kind of, I think, will be more commonplace going forward. And Lord knows where, our future will take us in this kind of thing. But I think we'll have learned a lot from the NFL, and we'll all have learned a lot from, having to make how much how much we can adapt to major changes in our life and how we have to make those adaptations and coping with them. I hope we all gained from this experience.
So you weren't one of the people who were doubting the season, because there have been people that come on the show and they were doubting, and they were like, I don't know, what do you think you would have had work wise? What would you have put out if there wasn't a season?
We talked about it, and I mean, so we cut back to 2 magazines, which made sense, right? I mean, I was convinced they were going to play. Once again, I'm not the businessman part of this. I'm the guy who makes bold proclamations and somebody else has to pay for them. So,
right on.
But still, I felt like doing 2 magazines seemed like a reasonable, dialing back. So I don't know. I guess we would have, held out, waited until this year and hoped for better going forward. And I mean, I think that's what a lot of people did. So, fortunate to be in a position where we could have ridden the storm out if it was one season. And I think, that's a big credit again to Emil and then figured out how to handle it going forward. I'm just glad that the focus was on, figuring out how to do it. And I just hope that we've all learned a little bit, the entire, business community, how to approach these things. Not everyone has the resources of the NFL, right? Not everyone has that, has that kind of money coming in. And even though they lost like half their money, like their live revenue, their gate, their live audience, that's still a $5 billion industry, right? So they had the resources to put into it, and they figured things out because they had those resources that hopefully other people can leverage going forward to use on a smaller scale. They can scale it smaller, however they need to do it to figure out how to keep going. But yeah, I was pretty convinced, and it went back to, like you could say what you want about Roger Goodell, right? I mean, whether you think he does a good job or not. But when I was hearing from people who work from the NFL were telling us that Roger Goodell basically sat everyone down and said, hey, hope is not a strategy. I want plans for everything. And they hired some really smart people, the medical people that they hired and the science crews. They built entire companies from scratch to do testing. I know at one point there was people like, wow, look at the NFL getting all these tests that other people could be getting. No, other people wouldn't have been getting those tests because they wouldn't have existed. The NFL literally built laboratories and hired staffs to man them and do all those things. And hopefully that at some point benefits other people as well. But that was kind of their approach, was we're going to do this and bulldoze our way through it because we're the damn NFL and stay out of our way. So that was why I was convinced all along that pretty much they were going to do this. And if it didn't work, it wasn't going to be because they didn't try.
So I want to go back to talking about, I did say we would bring up, the community and everybody that's in it and all the industry folks, the small, the big, everything in between. You have been in the fantasy football realm for a very long time, and there every year I swear there's like a wave of new people that come into this, that get involved in it. What do you think the biggest reason people get involved in the fantasy football industry now is? With all
same reason you and I did. We love it.
Yeah.
Right. And we think we have ideas that can be helpful that we want to share. And there's always going to be those people. And, not everyone wants to share their ideas, or not everyone feels confident enough to do it. And sometimes it's a process for people to get involved and get their feet wet and then start gaining the confidence necessary. I mean, I've worked with a number of people who over time it's taken them time to become something. And for me, this is the joy of what I get to do. Or like I find people and I try to, give them a platform and help them gain that confidence and watch them grow into something, or whatever they want to be. And so I guess it's just there's a shared love of the hobby, right? It's just that, and it goes back to that same thing I said at the beginning is that personal connection to a game we already love. Man, we value that. We love that. And especially as, kind of football has evolved with free agency and things like that, where maybe the allegiances to teams aren't what they once were. And, it kind of gives us a chance to build on that and have our own teams, things like that. I think those are all part of it. It's just a very comforting world to live in when you're dealing with something you really love, and you find this group of people out there who love it just as much. And they're out there sharing ideas and not just, not everyone out there selling everything. I mean, there's people out there that just wanted to talk and discuss, argue, have a good time with it. And that's the big part of it.
And how important do you think Twitter has been to the whole entire thing?
Twitter is both the most amazing thing ever invented and the most horrible thing on earth. So I'm trying to dial back. I used to answer every Twitter question I got. I now try to take that to different platforms to do it. Because it's just, when everyone can say something, everyone says something, right? Mm-hmm. So, but in terms of, collecting information and having discourse with people who really want to have, conversations, it's very useful for that. It's very useful for me when I'm out there trying to find new content, writers to, that I'm trying to find unique things to put in the magazines and unique voices to get out there and get on the radio show. It's been invaluable in that. So I don't want to sit here and knock it too much because it has been something I lean on heavily. But the evolution of it has been a little bit, gets a little bit tiring at times.
Yeah. And the more people that join the platform, the more people that come, it's going to get, like that. It's going to continue to be like that. But how important do you think just in general, because I know networking is a thing that people are kind of like, about, because they're like, you want to make a relationship with somebody, but how important is, being able to network and being able to like communicate with people that are also in the industry?
I think I often say, I love being able to meet people in human form because we all meet in this electronic medium, right? And like what we're doing now is a face-to-face. I consider this human form, but but until you get to that point where you're just, running across people on Twitter saying hi, you're kind of waving almost like drive-by, you're just, hey, how's it going? Hey. Oh, wow, nice stuff. Until you get that connection, I think it's super important. I think in person, the doing the King's Classic in Canton and meeting all the people there. Bob Lung adds to that with the expo, meeting all the industry people, going to the FSGA, which I don't get to do as much as I want because it comes at magazine time. I had to go this year because Emil Kadlec was inducted into the FSGA Hall of Fame. Congratulations to him. But also, it was nice to see the faces that, the people that I've known for years who we don't get to see all that often. And that face-to-face time is really great. And I think some of the people I've met, in Canton the last 2 times we went, and we'll be back this year. So in person,
I was going to ask you.
In person will be great there again. But I think a lot of those people I've gone on to, have enjoyable relationships with. And I tend to look for them. Like when I have a need for someone to write something or come on the radio, if I've met somebody and I've sat down and talked to them, there's just an obvious connection there that's hard to overlook when you're trying to, sort through all the incoming on Twitter.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like before I got on here, I was getting the password to get into StreamYard, and Russ Fisher at Dynasty Outhouse, who was like, who are you having on? I told him that I was having Bob Harris. So he said, I met him at the expo, and that you're like such an awesome guy. You have like your stories are awesome. So, it is cool that people kind of like know you, even though they don't like really know you, just based on.
Right. I think we're all, we all sit here in this online environment. And, so a little story, John Hansen and I worked, I call us frenemies. We were kind of competitors, but also, I did his website and, we kind of went at it and back and forth and worked, in parallel with each other. And that started, I think he got into it in 96 and I had been doing it a couple of years then. And it was, I think in 2014, Sirius took us to the FSGA and I'm sitting at a table. We're doing a live draft. We're broadcasting a live draft on Sirius Radio. I'm looking at John and it's the first time we've ever met in person. I'm just going, God, where does all this come, man? Look at all this. And it was an interesting moment where someone you'd worked alongside for, 20 some years without ever meeting them in person, right? You talk to them, you see them on the, you talk to them on the phone, you see them on video, whatever, but just sitting down and working with someone live and in person and covering a fantasy football draft live on a national radio platform, it was like almost surreal.
That's super awesome. Super awesome. And it's good to hear that you're going to be out there and everything. I know a lot of people in the fantasy industry are really excited to get out to the expo because like we didn't get to do it last year and we've had all this time. And now it's like this big event that everybody's like so excited about. So that's really cool.
Yeah. The FSGA was great like that as well. Yep. Just, walking in the door, seeing Joe Bryant and his wife, Andy Behrens, just everyone, Rick Will, just everyone that, you've seen over the course of years at those kind of events, but haven't been getting out to those events.
No. So yeah, it'll be a fun time. I want to bring up something that we were talking about earlier, because I was talking about my dogs, and I don't know if we were talking about it. I think we were probably talking it off mic, but cats. So you're a big cat dude, and I had cats growing up. My wife wants a cat. Sell me on getting a cat. Why are cats?
Because they bring you dead things and leave them at your feet. I mean, what
else can you ask right now, right?
I just they're very independent. I find their personalities to be more unique in that way than dogs, yet they still have those personalities. Right and they don't need the same level of attention that a dog needs. Like, I have nothing against dogs, right?
Right.
Just there's a level of effort there that does not come with a cat.
Yeah, there's a lot of effort there.
Yeah, and that's not to say cats are effortless. They are not. Right. They require some attention, and I've been a cat person for many, many years now. And so we'll see. I'm forcing my cats to move, and we'll see how that goes. This will be an interesting month.
Oh yeah, you're moving. So how is it leaving one heat to go to another heat? Like, aren't they like two different kinds of heats?
I actually, coming from Tucson, where I grew up and spent the first 30 years of my life, or a little more, the very dry heat, but very hot. And coming here to Albuquerque, where it's kind of like a lot like Tucson, except like 10 to 15 degrees cooler at any given time. It's been really nice. Now I'm going to a humid world.
Yeah, the humid
world. And I'm not sure. I think back to the last time I was in New York City, and I walked out the door. It was like somebody wrapped you in a wet piece of sheepskin.
That's not great.
And so I'm not necessarily looking forward to that. Also, I don't go outside that much, so I'll probably be okay.
Yeah, it'd be all right. And I mean, and watch out for the mosquitoes, because they're horrible.
I've heard. I've received a number of warnings.
Yes. Definitely. Okay, so you're wearing a Kiss shirt right now, and you're very much so into live music and music in general, but live music too, because I see it all the time. And I know with the pandemic, it put a damper on that too, which isn't like the biggest thing in the world that, to make us upset about.
Kind of is.
It kind of is kind of crappy. So do you have any live music, scheduled for any time in the near future that you're like looking forward to?
My fiance has a show lined up September in Dallas. I think the last couple of shows I've been to, the last concert I was at was Dallas. I saw Tool in January of last year. They're, one of the last shows, I think, before everything started shutting down. So I'm looking forward to that. Also, I think one of my favorite new bands, Ginger, they're a Ukrainian metal band with a lot of really interesting influences from hip hop to reggae to jazz. I mean, it's just a really great metal band, female front, who is amazing, Tatiana. So they'll be in Dallas. I know they're doing a tour of the country. At first I thought I was going to see them here, but I will see them in Dallas. So looking forward to, seeing bands starting to get out there, seeing a lot of really big metal shows. Metal is my thing. And so I'll be looking for all of it. And I've seen some, like we get to do a lot of things, like with Alice in Chains on Sirius. They have their fantasy league with a lot of musical people in there. So there's always some shows associated with that we get to go to. So just looking forward to, in general, going to as many. I go to as many as I can, right? I mean, when there's shows, and I mean, even small, I like a lot of small shows. I do a lot of club shows here in Albuquerque, some, maybe national acts that are playing smaller venues. That's one of my favorite things, and see some really amazing shows. And I can't wait to see more.
Yeah. And I'm the same way. I've got a show in a couple of weeks, and I'm like, hurry up and get here. It's been a while, so I totally get you there. So you brought up Scott Fishbowl earlier, and the music theme is very prevalent. Everybody's so excited about it. Everybody's getting the merch. Everybody's doing everything. Where are you in the Scott Fishbowl? What's your division?
I'm in the Metallica division.
Okay.
I don't think this was an accident. That's so one of my buddies, Andy Hall, who is in the radio business in Iowa, who is like Metallica's actual handpicked voice. When they release their huge box set things, they'll do like a record specials. He's like the host for those always. Also Gary Davenport's in my league, John Laub, my associate at Football Diehards, Gary, also Football Diehards, and 8,000 other places that he writes for. So it's a pretty good league. The John Evans, just a lot more people in it that I know than I've seen in the past, and that's fantastic as well. I'm sucking, but it's fun as always.
Fun as always. Do you know how many years you've been in the Scott Fish Bowl?
I'm a relative newcomer. I think this is only year 3 for me.
Okay.
And so I enjoy the hell out of it. Again, I've known Scott all along, and know exactly what he's up to and everything. So part of this is I'm in 20 plus 25, 30 leagues every year. Yeah. And so, I tend to, and I just, once you kind of realize the scope, and I was always on board with helping with the charitable aspect of this and everything. I just hadn't really been involved in the playing, and I just find out, why am I not playing in this? This looks like a blast. And it's like the best large field tournament ever. And always the unique rules. He's always pushing the boundaries, and that's the thing I like most about it. I think it's always, there's always that little twist, something a little bit different than what you've been doing.
Is there something this year that he threw in that you're particularly excited about?
I don't know if I'm excited about the whole kicker thing.
No? Okay. So it's the opposite.
I'm ambivalent. But it's interesting, right? See, because I've seen different approaches to it. I saw a league where a guy has 4 kickers already. And
wow.
I might have one.
Okay.
I don't know.
I don't have any yet. But
somewhere Jake Seeley is like shaking his fist at us just for talking about this. I'm intrigued. I kind of get the whole idea. You got a pretty decent floor really late in your draft, and so I get it. I may end up with more kickers than I thought I would when all is said and done.
Yeah, I don't have any yet, but we're in the 18th round.
We're 19, so I just got one.
Yeah. I don't have any yet, but I was really thinking about my quarterback situation's pretty crap. So I was like, when am I going to need to stream a kicker? Because that's going to happen.
So we're always fighting last year's battle, right? I have a saying, don't draft last year's best team. Yeah. And I think that's really good advice, and it's easily overlooked, right? It's really simple, but it's really, you have to not draft last year's best team. Also, don't fight last year's battle, right? Yeah. So in the Scott Fish Bowl, I became quickly quarterback ruinous. And I'm also in a dynasty league. Scott Barrett has this brutal dynasty league with some very heavy hitters in it. And in the initial draft, I drafted Andrew Luck just a month or 2 before he retired. Oh, yeah. And so he's still on my roster that I won't ever let go of him. I'm holding him in a little gilded cage, and but that's, so I went a little earlier on quarterbacks this year, a little tight end heavier, just trying some different things, waited a little longer on running backs. Still felt like I did pretty good. So not too long, but I'm old. Running backs are still a thing for me.
Yeah, I took running backs early, so I'm totally there with you. We're gonna end on a nice note about the Scott Fish Bowl and the community and the charitable aspect and and music, because music's very important to both of us. Well, before we go, I actually want to know what band is there out there that you haven't seen yet, or artist or whatever that you haven't seen yet that you want to see, your dynasty you just never got to.
Wow. I would really have to think that I would have to dig deep. And if I'm being honest, I've seen pretty much everyone. So
I was about to say, I think you probably have checked everybody off the list.
Honestly, I've seen the one that was that was only recent edition was Metallica. Yeah. Right. It's just never worked out. Right. And so actually yesterday was 4 years ago yesterday that I saw them. I went to Detroit and saw them. Awesome. So that was still a great memory. And so I would have really it would probably be bands that no longer are around.
Yeah. Oh,
and I mean, even some of those, I think I caught Led Zeppelin on their last tour, but I'm not sure I actually caught them. There might've been impediments to my full concentration. Full focus.
I mean, it happens. It happens. I've been to a couple concerts like that. So, all right, Bob, it has been a blast talking to you. You're such an awesome person to talk to. The conversation was great. And I know that anybody and everybody that's listening is going to enjoy this episode, but I want them to be able to follow you and find all your information, find all your awesome stuff that you got out there. So go ahead and tell everybody where they can find you.
At Football Diehard on Twitter. Don't be too mean to me. Oh, no, go ahead. Be mean. I don't care. Doesn't bother me. But footballdiehards.com is the website. The magazines are out on newsstands. Pro Football, Fantasy Football Pro Forecast, 32nd year. Football Diehards magazine, Cheat Sheets magazine, Draft Book magazine. A lot of great people in those books. I tried to get you in there and it didn't work out.
Yeah, I know.
We're not done with this yet. We're not done with this yet.
It's going to happen, guys.
But yeah, a lot of great people from the industry that you'll find in there that I think you'll all really enjoy. And that's kind of it. Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio. And once the season starts, it's hard to miss me, and I'm sorry for that.
It is. Don't be sorry. Not something to be sorry about, guys. All right, everybody, go check out everything that Bob has to offer because he's got a lot to offer. And hit him up and make sure that you guys come back next week for another episode. So stay rad.